Hi, folks. We're back for part two of the discussion of the offense in that Steelers game. Obviously, not a happy topic, but if you could make a topic like this happier, to talk to Gordon McGinnis of PFF, and he's here to join us for the second part of this again. Talk a little bit about the offensive line, talk about some individual performances in this game. Gordon, how's it going?
Doing well. Looking forward to talking about this. I think this is the part of the offense outside of the pass catching whereby it's less of a happy story.
Yeah, I would agree. Not a particularly happy story, particularly at those tackle spots where the Ravens really seem to have an enormous problem right now. All right, well, let me run through a little bit of this. The Stanley, we'll start with him. Seemed to be really overwhelmed by Highsmith in this game. Highsmith, a good pass rusher. He's one of the guys I give a larger subjective adjustment for, and the subjective adjustment is never that much, even with T.J. Watt or any of the real top pass rushers in the league. But it's something, and for him, it's not quite the highest. But he gave up a sack that was a forced fumble as well at the end of the game, where he got beaten straight up outside by Highsmith. 2 half quarterback hits, 5 separate pressure shares, 3 full and 2 half. And what's worse than that, he was run out of 2 more pressures by Lamar as I scored it. So just a nightmarish game of not being quick enough for Highsmith.
Yeah, it was not good. Is probably the nicest way to say that. The fumble for me, I think, is a really interesting one because, so I kind of jokingly tweeted because of how weird that game had been. Oh, we hadn't had the customary Lamar fumble. Of course, that's how the game ends. Like, it's a very different fumble from the fumbles Lamar's had throughout the start of this season, whereby it's poor ball security, it's, hanging around in the pocket, all those different things. This was 2.7 seconds, blindside, in the throw-in motion. Like, you can't blame Lamar for that. That's the offensive tackle has to be able to hold that long enough. Or if you're going to get beat, push him wide enough. Lamar was literally right at his time to throw when kept clean in that game, right at the point where his hand gets hit.
Yeah, it's one of the things Stanley's been really good at during his career is mirroring very effectively whoever the pass rusher is on that side and allowing what I call bump pressures on Lamar, which aren't the end of the world. They're pressures. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you're getting backed up into the quarterback, but he maintains very good position usually relative to pass rushers. And honestly, it was up and down in this game, with that being the biggest down point. But Highsmith beat him inside as well. He had a nice spin move on one play. Just a really difficult set of results for Ronnie Stanley. And anytime Ronnie comes back and plays a game like this, you worry about how close we are to the end.
Yeah, it's such a shame because the injuries, like, it does feel a little bit like him in a similar way to David Bakhtiari in Green Bay. A little bit different because of the stage of his career age-wise that Bakhtiari's at. But it feels like we've had like all-time pass blocking careers just ruined by injury. Like Stanley, his first couple of seasons in the NFL, even in college as well, just such a natural pass blocker. And it's that stuff you talk about mirroring players, and his footwork's so good. And the type of injuries he had are just things that are impacting the things he is good at. And I think if injuries impact the things you're not good at, that would seem like it's terrible, but in a lot of ways you can kind of compensate for that by the things you're good at. The injuries that Stanley suffered have impacted like what his strengths were in his game, and that's why this is so tough to watch at times.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. In terms of that ankle, that flexibility is not there. The ability to move around is just, it doesn't look the same. He seems to get rolled up on right now about once per game. It happened again in this game, and I was beside myself when I saw it happen because I was sure he was hurt, and incredibly gets up and he's playing the next play. But I almost wonder if there's some sort of steel boot or something he could wear at this point in his career that probably would restrict him even further in terms of mirroring, but might keep him a little bit safe on the back of his ankle because it just keeps getting rolled up on.
Yeah. Every time it happens, every time I've seen him go down, my immediate first thought is like, oh, I hope this isn't it.
Mm-hmm. 8 missed blocks in this game, 5 of those losses at the line of scrimmage. So I divide them like that. 1 block in level 2, 2 points on 3 pulls, 2 pancakes, no highlight. You have one kind of a vicious pancake after he had some poor success for several plays where he flipped a guy to the ground almost like in disgust over his own play, really, in some ways. Comes up with an F overall for me, 0.06 short of passing. It wasn't a complete fall off the table game, which I think is good. That Stanley is still battling in there in a game where he's getting beat fairly regularly. So we've seen James Hurst versus J.J. Watt and some other games over the years. O'Neal Cousins versus Lamar Woodley, and games that have been just incredibly one-sided affairs. And this wasn't that, but it was a pretty one-sided loss to Highsmith in this game.
Yeah. The way I would look at it is in Ravens context. This was truthfully probably worse than Patrick McCarry would have done at left tackle in this game, but it was significantly better than Daniel Faalele did when he stepped in at right tackle.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. I agree with both of those statements there. And we're projecting a little bit to say what McCarry would have done at left tackle, but McCarry's been a hang in there guy as well, even when he's had his bad games. Let's move over to John Simpson. And Simpson came to the Ravens, of course, this offseason with a reputation as a guy who drew tons of penalties. He had 17 flags and 1,545 NFL snaps with Las Vegas. Okay, so that's one every 91 offensive snaps or snaps that he played. So far with the Ravens, he's 1 every 48 snaps. He's had 4 in 192 or something like that this season. That to me is an enormous disappointment that the Ravens have not been able to turn him around on those holding flags in particular, which I believe are 3 of the 4 at this point.
Yeah, and one of them, the one in this game was the holding flag in this game was on the play where Lamar scrambled when they were down, like trying to come back at the end. And the holding plays that frustrate me the most are the ones whereby you're already beat and the quarterback's already had to move. Like you're not saving anyone by holding him here. Mm-hmm. It was a play whereby if he just doesn't hold, Lamar's already gone and he's already outside. And maybe there's like a coaching element here whereby sometimes I think you just have to understand. Like there are plays whereby you have to hold. If your quarterback is scrambling, if you're a tackle and your quarterback is scrambling left or right of the pocket, you risk your quarterback being hit and potentially injured if you don't hold. Leverage is lost, but you need to hold because you need to try and do something there. If it's like coming into the pocket and you have a quarterback who's going to get outside, you don't need to hold on those plays. And that's where it's so much more frustrating, is when it's a play that you just didn't need to. And that's what that one was.
And that honestly is a pretty high percentage of holding calls on run plays too, where they happen more frequently. And it's just, to me, it's a matter of Simpson learning to when the player is outside the frame. And there's an awareness of the ball carrier. He's got to have relative spacing of the ball carrier. But honestly, if he's out the frame, even if you're giving up a tackle at the line of scrimmage or even behind it, I mean, that's usually a hell of a lot better than a hold. Dan Reese had something that was pretty good that he did a couple of years ago, looking at the 2019 Ravens offense, that said a holding penalty on first down is approximately as bad as a 4-yard loss on first down in terms of converting a first after that. So think about it in those terms. If you're going to give up a 1 or 2 yard loss, particularly on first down, I mean, a holding penalty is just, it's holding outside the frame is not something you should be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the way, like, we downgrade penalties pretty severely at PFF. Like it's the equivalent of losing. It's the equivalent of losing on a tackle for no gain or a tackle for loss, or in pass protection. I want to say it's losing within either. I think it's within 2.5 seconds. So it's
give me a minus 2 to plus 2.
Minus 1 is generally
a penalty.
It's generally the penalty one. There are mitigations in certain occasions, but it's It's like -1.
A false start is -0.5 then, or is it minus, what is it?
-1 for false start as well. So like, and that's maybe, there's maybe like a difference in ways that we could look. I also don't know what I should probably clarify. There might be some like normalization stuff that's impacted. Like I'm talking about purely based on the actual data entry part, whereby it's like all those, pretty much all penalties, with the exception of ones whereby, I don't know, I'm trying to think of what mitigating factor there could be, but it's not coming to me just now.
And I've been a kind of a vocal proponent that I think you guys are a little bit underweight on penalties. That the in terms of how drives get stalled, if you look at that, it's much more heavily weighted to penalties. And so I give a -6, which is the same. It's not quite as bad as a sack because it's a -6 for 0, and a sack is -6 for 1. If you want to, so it adds 1 to your denominator also. So really, it's kind of like losing 7 points, but it's -6 on a hold, and that they just have a very big propensity to stall drives.
We probably should talk more about holds as not in a, like, in terms of relative to your position, the impact it has in a vacuum of your own performance is really not that dissimilar from like a turnover for a quarterback, right? If a quarterback throws an interception 30 yards downfield, compared with an offensive tackle holding on a play, an offensive tackle can't turn the ball over. So like within the relative things that he can control, that level of play is it's pretty bad.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, one way to think of it, that I think of it, because of a 60 snap game is normal, maybe, or 65 for an offensive lineman. You basically drop a full grade level at tackle for a holding call, and on the interior, if it was you do it at center, it might be a grade level and a half you drop. So it's pretty severe.
Yeah.
All right, a little bit more on Simpson here. Half a pressure, half a sack allowed. Two out of 3 on pulls. The problem with Simpson also, aside from the penalties, is that the guy is still got real balance issues, and he seems to be very vulnerable to the push-pull move, where he's convinced he's being pushed, and he kind of leans out over himself, and then he gets pulled right down to the ground. And every defensive tackle in the league who faces him seems to be hip to this and is looking to put him on the ground pretty quickly.
What I had a discussion with someone after week 1. So he graded really well for us in week 1. And this is probably a limitation on like looking at PFF grades on like a single game vacuum. And like, if you look through the tape of that game, there's a lot of stuff that happened in that first game that technique wise is not good at all. But it just didn't lead itself to him losing. There was a lot of plays whereby like he would kind of fall down, but be able to get enough of a shove that, and it's not, you shouldn't look at that game and say, okay, we can project this guy being good the rest of the way. You would look at that game and go, okay, he kind of got away with these things, and that's why he didn't grade poorly. But actually, here's these few things that we're really quite concerned about. And that's, those mistakes have been kind of similar kind of throughout as the season's gone on.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm all for blocks being successful, even if they're from the ground, but completely agree with that assessment that basically you still can't project a lot of growth from somebody who's on the ground all the time. It's just, that's not the place you want to be blocking from.
The crazy thing though is that, we talked about this in the first show. If the alternative is Salah, I'm still good with this.
Oh yeah.
The alternative I think would be, I hate being negative, but like realistically, if Salah had to start right now, I think he's probably the worst starting guard in the NFL.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Based on what we saw in the preseason, you see a guy who's just not ready to be on the field. But, he's a developmental player, so maybe he's a second-year starter. He's going to probably get an opportunity to go against Cleveland, I would guess, next year for the left guard job, while Voorhees is at right guard, and Simpson has gone on to whatever pastures exist for him.
I completely forgot about Andrew Voorhees. That's got
huge.
me a lot more excited about the offensive line next year. I forgot about him. Yeah, I love that trade up this year.
Yeah, he's the man. He's if he ends up being anything less than a starter, it's going to be a really big lost opportunity for another Browns story for Ravens fans. Anyway, great pick. What else I have to say about Simpson? I had him as a C overall in this game. He just, one of the things about it is he really wasn't fully responsible for the sack or the pressure, even though he certainly contributed to it. This is maybe a time to have a very brief discussion about this. And I've had this conversation 20 times with various PFF people. I'd say this is at least the second, maybe third time with you about whether or not you should give out 2 half sacks or a full sack under certain circumstances. And you guys all give out ones or zeros, although I know you give out downgrades that are behind the scenes, which may more accurately is the wrong word, but if you're dealing with only 1 or 0, you have some loss of accuracy there.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
But I do think it's an interesting point. Like, so the way we approach sacks from the defensive side of like half sacks and sacks, if you're trying to quantify a player, I think full sacks for everything there makes sense because if 2 players get the quarterback at the same time, slight little bit of grey area in the sense of like, would they both have taken the quarterback down as opposed to allowing a scramble and those things. But from an offensive line perspective, when there are 2 guys at fault, I can see a lot more case for splitting things up there a little bit and breaking those things up.
And the point that I've gotten from Neil first, and then for Ben Stockwell for years when I talked to him was that, when 2 guys meet at the quarterback, why shouldn't we? When both offensive tackles get beat by the guys, why shouldn't both offensive tackles take a full downgrade for the sack on those plays? And I he's completely right. The collective he of everyone who's ever told me that is completely right. But the problem is it's like a 3% subset of all sacks where you have 2 guys equally beat for a meet of the quarterback. Everybody have a party sack.
Yeah.
And probably 55% of sacks are some multi-contribution. And watching the Ravens play, it's almost always first man pressure, second man sack this year. So we see it. And anyway.
Yeah, I do think it's an interesting way. Almost so in soccer, they don't just look at assists now; they look at second assists because sometimes, like, the actual assist is not anything particularly important, whereas that second assist was the pass that set up the assist, and that's the special part. There's potentially something there in the future whereby, like, what pressures led to sacks. If you give up pressure and that leads to a sack, is there some way to like quantify that? And there must be. Even within our data we currently have, that's probably something that can be done.
I bet there would be. And I bet if you looked at it this year that Jadeveon Clowney in particular would have done pretty well in terms of that, because I've got it listed out on a play-by-play basis. And there's a whole lot of PR24s with a sack that comes after that in there, because he's been Mr. Almost, as you've seen Humphrey get on. So anyway, C for Simpson. Let's move on to Linderbaum here. I thought aside from the snap decision, which was god awful to make that judgment, I thought he played pretty well in this game. Did allow 1 penetration, 1.5 pressures. 1.5 pressures is getting up there for a center, but it is what it is. He only missed 2 blocks. Otherwise, as I had it, one of those is a loss at the line of scrimmage. 3 out of 3 on polls, a B for the game. First of all, how did PFF grade him? Because I don't even know, honestly.
Pretty similar. So he had, I want to say, the highest grade for any offensive lineman, just over Zeitler. It's like 74.2. That probably translates to B pretty well. It's in that kind of B. That's maybe B plus range at that point. The interesting thing I thought was that, like, watching him move out there, it looked like he wasn't fully healthy himself. But still, like, as he played, he looked fully healthy, if that makes sense. Like, his movement, I was like, oh, is he still laboring a bit here? But his play actually didn't look like he was being impacted by that. A little bit different to Stanley, whereby his play was like, okay, yeah, he's definitely still hurt. I just love. I was so upset when he got hurt early in the year because, like, he, as you would expect from a guy they took in the first round, he has all the potential of, like, best center in football.
Yeah, he definitely does as a run blocker. I've been really down on his pass blocking and some of the. It's not traits as a pass blocker as much as length and size issues that he had. I will say this: at camp this year, looks a lot bigger. Looks like a lot more filled out in terms of the body. I think they have his weight listed exactly the same level, but he's bigger. And the problem is he's never going to get longer, and we still see a fair amount of the time this happened a lot more in his rookie year, where he gets really jacked up by a defensive tackle crossing the guard's face, where he has more time to get his arms out long, and sometimes can even make that 2-to-1 conversion very quickly in terms of two arms on him initially, then one, and gets him jacked up on one foot pretty easily. I still see problems there, and I know the way you guys combine your grades is such that his grade as a center is much more dependent upon his run blocking grade than his pass blocking grade.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I also, in the pass blocking stuff as well last year, the thing where I thought he, especially early in the year, where I thought he really struggled was stunts.
Yep.
He couldn't identify what he was supposed to do or identify them in time. And it wasn't even, and this is going from college to the NFL. Mm-hmm. He was a half beat or a beat late on knowing on identifying it and picking up. And by that point in the NFL, it's too late.
So some of that is processing, and there's no doubt about it. I agree with you completely on the stunt pickups are generally bad. I think the secondary problem with that is that when there's a stunt that goes into him where he's part of that pick area, that's where he has more problem with the length of these ginormous men he's facing at the NFL level. So, but that also means he's probably more worried about that, and he's up on one foot, and then he has to peel off and pick up that linebacker who's coming through it. Yeah. All right, let's move on. Zeitler, I thought he had his best game of the season in this one. His last week was okay. He was in the B range for the first time after 3 really not good games to start the year. 2 full pressures. The only negative offenses I had it scored. He was 4 to 5 on pulls. Missed 3 blocks, but none of them were losses at the line of scrimmage. That's really good as a distinction as far as I have. So it means he's getting a level 2 and not making a block, or he missed a pull in this case and he didn't get a block there. So generally speaking, A- after adjustment. I thought a pretty positive game of avoiding mistakes. Did you guys have anything else in terms of like a significant downgrade for Zeitler in the game other than the 2 pressures?
I think we had him for 3, so I can look into that, but it's pretty similar. Like I could even be one whereby we have it more on him and you have it more on Linderbaum or something like that. I'm not sure, but I need to look into it. We had it as his best game of the year as well. And to be honest, like I was really worried for a good couple of weeks. The past 2 weeks, it's felt like he's been significantly better in pass protection than he was. Those first 3 weeks, I was, and like obviously given his age now, this is the downstage of his career. He's probably not playing for the Ravens next year, I don't think, if he even decides to continue his NFL career. But this was a lot more, like veteran in the latter stages of his career, but still able to perform versus, I don't know if this guy's going to survive the season type of performance.
Right. And in his case, I've really found it was more about his anchor was just missing as a pass blocker. And it's not like he didn't get beat a little bit outside and whatnot, but is really his anchor missing, getting bull rushed more than he had in the past. And there is technique in there. There's also obviously some other elements of that, but you got to worry about this every time. Of course, he's in the last year of a 3-year deal with the Ravens. The Ravens have gotten tremendous value from his contract, even if he plays at his current level the rest of the year. So they've still gotten tremendous value out of this contract, but it really shows up just how important it is not to get stuck with an old maid contract for a guy who's over 30 years old. And he wanted an extension. I don't think it was really ever in the cards that the Ravens are going to be able to give him one, given their large set of free agents that are leaving. I think that they are committed to saving money with Voorhees next year at right guard. But it's something you got to avoid those old maid contracts in the 30s like nobody's business. And Zeitler is not necessarily one. He could sign somebody else and he could be great for 3 more years. But you also don't want to get folded into one of these perpetual 2 years signing for a 1-year contract deal that sometimes older players will put you through.
Yeah, I think they made the right decision. And maybe they get to the end of this year and decide, we want to go a 1-year deal or something like that. I think it's probably not that likely, but you're better to give yourself the opportunity versus tying yourself to, someone for a good number of years.
Yeah. And I think the Raven way has always been basically play for your contract, and take it to the market if you need to. But at the end of this year, we wish you the best if you go into the year. And we certainly wish you have a great year for us and increase your value and potentially net as a comp pick. So anyway, I think all those things are still possible, by the way. I think Seitler could still net the Ravens a comp pick, especially since they've lost some apparent comp picks with players like Dobbins falling off this year.
Yeah.
McCary played the first 48 snaps of the game. I thought he was reasonably solid, not great, certainly. I had him for one pressure, half a quarterback hit, and 2/3 of a sack in the times he was in. 3 missed blocks that is wrong, what I have there, and I don't have the correct number right on me, so I need to look that up again. I'll just say that I have as B- in total after adjustment. I did have a very large adjustment for Watt. It would have been 0.10 normally, but the Ravens gave him tons of help. They put Ricard on his side, and they made other offensive sacrifices to try and stop TJ Watt in this game that were very effective, by the way, but also really limit what McCary's positive impact was on the game. So anyway, B- after adjustment for him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we had him a little bit lower, and he was like high 50s or low 60s. But again, that's, right around that kind of defined as. So I think initially we defined like 60 as like the replacement level. I don't think that's really true based on the actual kind of replacement level. Like I think for offensive tackles, anything above a 50 is, some level of starter / high end backup in the NFL. So I think that's probably about where this performance was.
It's a very scarce skill set. And you're looking at a pass blocking rating at offensive tackle, generally speaking, or an overall rating, or the pass blocking rating is most of it anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's I wouldn't be surprised by that. In the old days of the +2 to -2, there was a whole lot of red on that scale, and there weren't too many greens at the top. I remember one year that there was a big difference in the median point between run and pass blocking that was different. I think you guys have adjusted for that since and talked about it, but I talked to Ben about it a few years back, and it was a strange phenomenon that it didn't seem to be centered up in the way you'd expect it to be at a maybe it'd be a 65 or maybe a 60, but whatever it was, it should be similar. All right, let's talk a little bit about Daniel Falele, who was awful in 19 snaps. It was a short game. He's lucky. Lucky. He's not lucky. He doesn't care. But 20 snaps is the minimum for a grade for me. So he escapes a grade here. 1 pressure, 1 quarterback hit, 1 full sack allowed. That's not right. I only gave him a half sack. I got to look at that again here. But I gave him a half sack on the final play because I gave half of it to Hill for whiffing on Watt on that chip block we talked about.
Yeah, it was not a good game, and it's enough. Like when Ronnie Stanley went out, and it was Patrick McCary replacing him, you have an expectation of a drop off in performance, but because of where I feel about McCary, that he's a capable enough player, you're not worrying about everything completely falling apart. I do think there is enough concern that like Falele can have enough plays in a full game that are game breaking type of plays that it is a pretty big concern.
Yeah, I agree. And he had a .42 raw score in this game. That's right on the border of falling off the table entirely. And I did do it against a good player, so probably right on that border of you just can't have him out there, and he's going to embarrass you just too badly to do this. But he's a developmental offensive lineman who's forced into a starting role. It's not a positive situation. You probably would, if you had your druthers, probably would not want to have him active on the roster. You'd probably like to have other players, but the Ravens they didn't set themselves up. I thought it was one of the big weaknesses of the offseason. They didn't really.
Aaron Rodgers' season is officially over, but yours has just begun at MyBookie. NFL, college ball, and the brand new cash-out system gives you options to bet and win all season long. First 2 legs of your parlay hit? Cash out early and place another bet, or let it ride for a chance at a bigger payday. Join us at MyBookie for an entire season filled with daily odd boosts, same-game parlays, and huge prize pool contests. Right now, MyBookie has a no-strings-attached cash bonus that lets you deposit and withdraw quick. Use the promo code RAVENS on your first deposit of $50 or more, and you can receive up to $200 in cash instantly credited to your MyBookie account. That's promo code RAVENS to claim your cash bonus now. You can bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie.
Go out and get a guy who can play a middling backup left tackle. They're not easy to find, but it's like they needed another. The year after they drafted a developmental tackle, they needed another developmental tackle.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the hope was probably that there was more development this offseason, I guess, the point that he got to that okay level backup tackle, and it just hasn't. And, it's young in his career, and also his career arc is not the same as a normal offensive lineman because, he isn't originally from the US, I think originally from Australia. I'm guessing has the rugby background. I say I'm guessing. I think I read that. So like it might take him a little bit longer than it takes NFL players just to, or players who were kind of through high school and everything in America.
You see it in his play because he's not an independent hand usage guy, and you want a guy who will punch and really compete with those defensive ends. As scary as J.J. Watt is, he's 2/3 the size of Daniel Faalele. I mean, if Daniel Faalele chooses to punch him in the stomach, T.J. Watt is going to feel it. And if he punches him below the armpit, he's going to feel it. T.J. Watt, I'm sorry, getting the initials confused here, but he doesn't like to be hit in the midsection by Justice Hill. I guarantee you, really doesn't like to get hit in the midsection by Gus Edwards. So offensive linemen, you just need to be physical with these guys. Pass rushing is tiring as hell to start with, and every additional, physical, bit of effort you can put into to blocking a guy like that makes it that much more difficult for him to finesse his way around you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're more fun part of the show here. We'll talk about some individual skill position players. I know we hit on a lot of these in the first half of the show. Hope people go back and download that. But Gordon, you're the guest. Who would you like to bring up?
Let's talk some Zay Flowers usage. So for all the negatives of the drops, the tripping up on the deep pass, the most exciting part of this for me was how they used him and threw the ball to him more downfield. If it wasn't already obvious, he is wide receiver 1 in Baltimore. I think he had half of his 20 plus yard attempts, and I think more than half of his 10 plus yard attempts on the season so far, just in this game alone. And he looks good doing it. Again, caveat of the right at the catch point part on the drops. Even the first one as well, like you give him a little bit of a break on the first drop because it was a little bit behind. It wasn't enough behind that he had to make too much of an adjustment. He still absolutely should have caught it. But he's a good football player. I think of all the guys they've drafted in the first round in recent years, there's good reason for why they're excited about him, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the usage is just tremendously exciting because this is drawing safety help is what he needs to do for starters. The Steelers, playing a lot of zone defense and obviously watching Lamar, that's going to happen a lot. Flowers route running doesn't come into it so much, but Flowers, I think, has developed a really good ability to find space against zone defenses. And, we saw that there was one that got called out on the broadcast and it wasn't even that deep, 10 yard, 12 yard kind of throw, but did a real good job of finding space between defenders. And, if you try and cover him in man, he's such a sudden athlete, doesn't even really need to be a great route runner to get separation from you. And all you got to do is go to camp and watch him burn the Ravens defensive backs play after play after play. And you really get to see that. But I was very, very happy with the way he's used in this game. I thought that, they still haven't run him consistently on a bunch of 9 routes, but even just getting into level 3 in this game and trying to get him behind the defense as he did on the fall down play, I thought that on tape has got to mean something to the next defensive coordinator.
Yeah. I love how him and Lamar are already, the chemistry they have on scrambles is already there. Like And again, it's such a small, subtle thing for wide receivers, but this is where he hasn't developed that same chemistry with Bateman, and probably largely because of the amount of time he's missed and stuff like that. But 2 weeks in a row, there's been scramble drill type of plays where Flowers just seems to know how to find that little space, how to sit down in it. I think this is the one they called out on the broadcast as well. And Lamar already trusts that he's going to be in the spot that he can. So as soon as he starts scrambling, I think Flowers is the guy he's looking for there.
Yeah, the disappointing one along those same lines was Flowers not getting the proper depth on the early snap, the mistimed snap by Linderbaum, which was obviously an attempt to get a false start penalty, or sorry, a offsides penalty from the defense. Didn't work out. And then Lamar's in a scramble drill heading right, and Flowers was actually free. He was down the right side there. So part of it's on Lamar for overthrowing that ball a little bit, and part of it's on Flowers for not trying to get even more depth on that play.
Yeah. On that, like, we didn't talk about this earlier, actually, when we talked about Linderbaum, and I kind of meant to bring it up. Linderbaum obviously is wrong on the snap.
Mm-hmm.
But my initial thought when I saw that response was, I think that's also a coaching thing, based on the time left, right? Like, how much value is a first down at that point? Because how likely are you? I know you're going to get an opportunity to score, and maybe that's why it's still worth it. But like, the cost benefit of getting that wrong on fourth down versus you've got 18 seconds or something left at that point. It didn't feel worth it to me. But I instantly knew that was what had happened. Like, when the ball was snapped, I was like, that definitely wasn't supposed to happen. I initially was like, he's seen Quan Alexander come up. There's been some kind of call whereby, that's where that is. And interestingly, it's probably the biggest negative I would have on the Ravens from the two losses this year. The Zay Flowers fair catch on the safety. The report at the end of the game was, he was told to go out and fair catch it because they saw on the scoreboard that it was under 2 minutes to go. And then by the time he went out there, the scoreboard updated and it was now over that. Like, okay, but that's a critical point in the game. You have to make that adjustment, call a timeout, or do something there that makes him understand that.
Okay, I want to unpack a little bit of that, but for the Flowers play, you can see from the all 22 from the sideline view, from the top view, that Harbaugh motions to Flowers and puts up the number 2 to him, waits for a response, then gives him a thumbs up in return. So he thought he got the response from Flowers, that Flowers understood that there was more than 2 minutes on the clock and he had to take it down to 2. Although I don't know why this gives you all that. Clearly a mistake by Harbaugh, no doubt about it. Harbaugh owned up to it after the fact, which is that's what you got to do. You got to own that mistake, and not leave it on your players, because you lose currency with them, not just with the fans who think you're full of shit when you try and pull that off. But with this play, it was a no snap call. So I have to believe that they might have snapped that ball to go for it on 4th and 2 anyway, if Linderbaum was willing to do it. So it kind of looked like they're going up there to try and draw them off sides. And if you're going to do that, the players responsible for doing that need to be the guards or the tackles on the side that happens. But the center's got to remain motionless, and the guard has to flinch as soon as Quan Alexander or whoever it was moved across the line of scrimmage, and show that. And then you've got your two outcomes then become: I lose 5 yards on a false start penalty if it's called against me, or I gain 5 yards in a first down. But either one is a 41 versus a 46-yard field goal. Not too much of a difference for Tucker. I think we'd agree.
Yep.
Or you do that. But that massive error there. And I just wish there were better game management understanding generally among players in the NFL. And obviously, we talked in the first show about Pickens running in for that score almost cost Pittsburgh the game, or could have cost Pittsburgh the game. It didn't in this case, but it did for the Bears, 2 years ago when they played the Ravens. So it's one of these things that it just needs to be better awareness of these things, and probably it means teaching it from a fundamental level. Maybe bringing rookies up to speed as soon as they come into their first camp. to talk about it, and then bringing it up every camp and saying, hey, what's the correct play in this situation? Anyway, pick another player. You go ahead.
So this is a I guess a brief one on my end. This is probably a mini rant. I would love it if the NFL, this maybe the Ravens, maybe the NFL, could classify Patrick Ricard as a tight end first now, because it messes with a lot of like 11 personnel versus other personnels. I know he's not exclusively, but he is primarily a tight end at this point. And there's a lot of, I think it was Ryan Mink who tweeted this out at after the first two games or something like that. And he was like, oh, the Ravens are in 11 personnel X amount of the time. And like, I'd literally just written about how there's like 20 or 30 plays, I couldn't remember the exact amount, whereby they were in 11 personnel. It's just that it was being called 21 because Patrick Ricard was lined up at tight end on the play. And I went through them all individually to count them. And like, of all their 21 personnel snaps, there were like 2 or 3 whereby he was actually a fullback on the play.
Okay. So I'm sorry. They would have been lined up then in 12 instead of 21 is what you mean?
Yeah. What's the,
so 12 and 21. If it's okay. So the last number is the running backs and I'm sorry.
Yes.
The last number is the tight ends. The first number is
yes.
running backs.
Yeah. So they were actually, it was being called 21 because they had 2 running backs on the field, but one of those running backs was Ricard lined up as a tight end.
Right. So that's a place, in particular in 12 and at 12 versus 21, where it really is a different characterization of what you're trying to accomplish. And having that extra guy on the line of scrimmage is what most NFL teams do. They play a lot of 12. But it's very different. I understand why you'd want that, or even to just have a difference between the apparent formation and the actual formation. Just look at the actual, and I try to characterize it 2 different ways, because you have the apparent formation is what you're showing the opposing defensive coordinator in terms of players you're putting on the field, and he has to react to that without knowing how you're going to line up, and then you line up and you're lining up your 13 personnel that way, with 3 inline tight ends or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
All right. That's an interesting one. Let's talk about Isaiah Likely a little bit. He's a forgotten man at this point. He's had 5, he's played in the games, but he's had 4 targets with 3 receptions in 5 games. What do you make of this at this point?
It's really interesting because in preseason, I genuinely wondered if Charlie Kolar was going to be one of the final cuts because of the move for Ricard. And that didn't happen. He's still in the roster, but Likely is the guy who is suffering, because when they line up in 2 tight ends, it's Ricard that they're kind of keeping out there. And the targets thing, I think realistically is just the other players that they have available. So last year, though, in times where he played with the receiving talent they had, even if Mark Andrews was there, he was probably the second best pass catcher on the roster. This year, like 5th maybe. So there's not the targets there for him, which is a shame, because I actually think he has the potential to be a really talented player. It's just hard to fit. And you go back to that draft where they drafted Likely and Kolar together. At the time, for how they play on offense, perfect sense. How their offense is now, you've now got 2 players that actually, they don't really have a role within your offense unless someone gets hurt.
Right. And that could happen, but Kolar has not been the peripheral type player. And what I mean that is a blocker. First of all, he has not been as good a blocker as he initially showed. And then he's had issues holding onto the football as well, in terms of catching it downfield. Likely had a lot of problems with drops last year, which that may be part of the trust issue with Lamar. I don't really know, but he's been on the field a fair amount. I want to get his snaps for the season here. Let me look those up as we're moving on here. But he's a guy who I would hope, he's played 113 snaps only this year. Oh, this is not good. Now, I'm just looking on the PFF site here. So his snaps by game, 46 in the opener, then 25, 19, 15, and 8.
Yep.
Wow.
So basically, as the healthier Mark Andrews has gotten, the less and less that we are seeing Isaiah Likely. I think it just speaks to this. So the interesting thing for me is that coming into the season, I did think that this kind of reduced role was possible, if not potentially likely, to pardon the inadvertent pun there. But I do think there's an opportunity as the season wears on to use him almost as like a little bit of load maintenance for Mark Andrews, because Mark Andrews is a player who, when the chips are down in the playoffs, you want Lamar Jackson to have on the field so that you can throw the ball up and have him make a play. So later on in the season, if you want to maybe it's just 10 snaps a game one week, 5 snaps the next week, but just trying to kind of reduce that and reduce some of the impact there could be beneficial for them.
So you're saying decrease Andrews snaps by 5 to 10 snaps and give them to Likely, because Likely can't afford for 5 to 10 to be all the snaps, because that's what he's got now.
Yeah. So use Likely as the primary backup to Mark Andrews, and it makes sense, right? The way they're playing offense right now, what they want what they want Ricard to be. It makes sense that he's playing the number of snaps he's playing. I think he's playing the role pretty well. So Likely, can't steal that role. So him being the primary Mark Andrews backup makes sense. And it would probably make sense to me for him to eat into Andrews' snaps a little bit more. And maybe we'll see that in games, if they are up by a little bit more, they can give Andrews some breathing time and stuff.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And if I'm just thinking about it a little bit, I think they need Ricard more right now with the tackle situation being what it is. And particularly these last 2 weeks against the Browns and Steelers, who have outstanding edge rushers, to try and deal with them. Maybe if they face a few weaker ones, maybe they'll get a little more opportunity to get Likely on the field again. But
yeah, I also think as well, Isaiah Likely last year, I thought was a really good run blocker, but he was a really good run blocker in the move tight end sense, in the sense that he is blocking
level 2 and level 3 players.
Yeah. Where Ricard is really good. Really good is maybe a stretch. I think he's been better than people expect him to be, given the kind of position change, is sealing edge defenders this year. If you look at a lot of the Ravens' good runs from this year, there's Ricard making a block. And these are not tough blocks to make, because you have the leverage, right? You're outside the end, you're outside the edge defender, and you're pushing down. But the difference between Isaiah Likely and Ricard is just size and strength. And that's on those type of plays, that boost that you get from Ricard's strength is pretty significant.
It almost seems ridiculous that there was a lot of call to cut Ricard this preseason and do without him. Going through the year, I hope people remember this now and tie it to Monken's offensive usage of him, that just not a player we're going to easily be able to do without. What do you think next year? I think there's a $4 million cut number for Ricard next year. I believe he does have. I may be wrong. Maybe he's not under contract for a year, but forget whether he is or not. When the Ricard era is over, do you anticipate the Ravens going to trying to find another defensive line convert? Or do you think they'll go through the traditional college fullback route to try and find a use check type that is a good Swiss Army knife that they can use out of the backfield and also get into the passing game zone?
If I had to guess, I think that it might reduce even further the fullback usage. And what they might look for is just either Kohler or Likely step up and get better as blockers, or you look for more of a traditional blocking tight end in that sense. But you're right, the level of play, and the level of importance that he has just consistently been underrated. I know he was kind of like the kind of thing people pointed to last year, like, why is he running this hitch? And, this is a complete waste of, all this time and usage. But he's such a good run blocker. Like I said, you look at the Ravens' good runs this year, you look at their good runs throughout the years, Patrick Ricard's there.
Outstanding. I think it's your turn again.
How about Nelson Aguilar? If I was to say to you, he is the second best wide receiver in this roster right now in terms of performance and health. How inaccurate a statement do you think that is?
I don't think I can disagree at this point. I mean, and part of the problem is that he didn't haul in the balls. That's the only thing I can look at. But he did haul in a modestly difficult 30-yard grab where people were hacking at his arms, and then dropped obviously an enormous play that might have been a touchdown, but certainly would have put in the Ravens, set him up inside the 10-yard line at about the very worst. I was really upset with the trade when it was made originally. I thought probably not only was he not worth the money because he'd been so low in almost every significant metric, drops, the yards per target was terrible. His catch rate was really bad. I mean, towards the bottom of NFL receivers last year in a lot of different bad categories to be near the bottom. And all of a sudden, he's a swan in this offense again. And it's good to see.
Yeah. And you need that. Like, one of the biggest things they've had this year, I was similar to you when they signed him. And obviously, like, the signing of him when it happened in the offseason was a huge issue for people because the Ravens needed help at wide receiver. So the time where they brought him in, Zay Flowers hadn't been drafted and Odell Beckham hadn't been signed. So it was like, okay, great. Our wide receiver 1 and 2 are Rashad Bateman and Nelson Aguilar. Like, that's the move you're going to make. But his impact has allowed them to survive those Odell Beckham and Rashad Bateman injuries. And if everyone's fully healthy, and up to speed, like, he is the 4th best wide receiver on the roster, I think. But having a wide receiver 4 who can be a wide receiver 2 when he has to be is just, it's a light years away from where they were a year ago. I remember tweeting this out heading into the season. Like, I don't think there's a position group that looks more night and day than it did at the end of last season than the Ravens wide receivers from the playoffs last year to this year.
Yeah, it's a great point. It certainly is. And I guess there's part of me that just says you never give away a compensatory draft pick, like a 6th round compensatory pick for nothing. Basically was what I was, looking at here is this. First of all, why is it hard to wait on a Nelson Aguilar? If it's like $3.25 million now or whatever the heck it was that he ended up signing for, he's going to take $3.25 2 months from now. It's not like there's some huge Nelson Aguilar market that's going to suddenly uncover itself from people who don't draft the wide receiver 4 they need. It's a strange situation to find your team in. I do wonder if any of it had to do with the Lamar signing, that they said we need to show that we're stocking the room up with a lot of ponies and not just the biggest horses here as well. And so
I think that's possible.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Anybody else we need to talk about? How we doing on time here? Okay. We got to be pretty quick out of here. I'll talk about one more, and that's OBJ. Ravens have not gotten what they wanted out of Beckham so far this year. I don't think there's any case. How much do you put on him for the interception occurring, and how would you rate his effort on defense on that play?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to look at the interception, because I think the fault of that interception is somewhere split between Beckham, Lamar, and also just like the play call in that situation. Yeah. Like I don't understand why that's your primary option on that play. But it's not like Lamar probably puts it a little bit off target for where he had to put that ball. I think that's fair to criticize him a little bit there. But Odell Beckham Jr. has been in the NFL too long to be getting boxed out and out-muscled to that ball from Joey Porter Jr. I think there's an opportunity for him to have fought for an incompletion more than, him catching that ball probably would have been a difficult catch in that situation, but there was an opportunity for him to force an incompletion there, I think. And I think he gave up on it a little bit. Yeah.
I'm very frustrated when a receiver does not go for the arms, and usually the move is go for the dominant arm and then push the other side of the body. If Porter is twisted because you grab his right arm and you push his back shoulder blade on that play, you got to know what's happening. But that ball is obviously coming up short, and he was already trying to push Porter, which is absolutely not the right move to do. You got to push and pull him at the same time to get him turned. And I was frustrated by it. Just watching it, every time I watch it, it makes me angry to see that.
What do you think about usage wise, I'm a little bit disappointed that we haven't seen him more in the slot. Like, I feel like a lot of his, at this stage in his career, the kind of ability to run some savvy routes and some quick slants and stuff like that from the slot can be like a real opportunity.
I mean, I'd be all for it if they can get this to work. Obviously, they need more early out opportunities, meaning getting the ball out quick from Lamar's hand. Just they need to have it in the bag, whether they use it or not. And I think him in the slot makes a lot of sense. I don't like him at the X at all. And so I think if you're gonna use him, you probably are going to use him in the slot. And honestly, the biggest thing for me to see the rest of this year, the remaining 12 games, is for Bateman to start playing well, stop dropping the football, start gaining some trust with Lamar. And it's a big mountain to climb, but he's the guy who has some upside.
Yeah.
And Odell doesn't at this point in his career.
You talked about it in the last section with Aguilar, right? If all that Odell Beckham Jr. signing accomplished was it got the combination of that and the Jalen Hurts deal got Lamar signed, I don't care if it was a $50 million overpay or however much it wound up being. Like, if it's a 1-year deal, so like you're not tied into that, beyond. I know there's void years and there'll be further cap implications.
15 million of cap hit next year. That's what I'm pissed off
about. But if that is the thing that got Lamar back to the table and got this over the line, then okay, fine.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in the same place as you. Gordon, always a pleasure to talk football with you. I know we could go on for hours here. I know you have another meeting coming up in about 5 minutes, so I want to make sure you get to that. But tell folks where they can find your work online. What your role is at PFF now?
Yeah, I am. I'm currently our head of content. So responsible for everything we do. Not everything in the sense of writing it, but the kind of general direction of it in written content, social media, and video. And you'll find me online on Twitter/X, PFF_Gordon.
Love to hear just maybe another minute on this. Is how much do you micromanage that component through? And okay, I don't want to put you in this position to say this online, but do you have to suggest article types that people are writing, or do they come to you with their 5 best ideas and you say, let's pursue that one kind of thing? Or what do you do?
So it's like a little bit like I'll kind of go. So I have like a whole editorial team. Like I have a lead editor as one of the people who reports into me. Generally speaking, with all my guys, like my head of video, head of editorial, head of graphics, head of social, like I don't like to micromanage. My job is to kind of remove things that are issues for them. If I have suggestions for stuff, I'll give them to them. But like I'm really fortunate to work with some very talented people who know what good social media is, what good video is, what good article content is. So a lot of my job is actually just trying to make sure that they have what they need to do their jobs.
All right. Outstanding stuff, Gordon. I'm sure you make a very great manager of an area like that. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. I'll get back to you very quickly. But I think you guys know the drill by now. Any nice new thing you want to talk about, particularly if any of the PFF interns would like to be on the show. I look for their work whenever I can. Eric Eager hired some great people. I'm sure you guys are still doing it in terms of having an intern program. Is it summer only internships, or is it like a year-round thing you do now?
I think it's been summer only recently. There was a few years ago. It was like kind of year-round thing. It's now primarily kind of summer.
All right. Well, maybe it's still a good opportunity anyway to get some very smart young kids in the building and get them working on some interesting projects. But anyway, Gordon, again, a pleasure to have you on again.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.